Hello, Eagles and draft fans. Welcome to the Big-Legged Waistbenders podcast. I'm your host, WannaB. I work at the Eagles Film Room on Patreon with Johnny Page and Shane Heff. Today with me, a special guest, Johnny Page from Bleeding Green Nation. How you doing, Johnny? Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, it's good. I was thinking it's weird. We've been working together, but not managed to find the time because draft season is crazy. This is probably the most in-depth draft stuff I've done. So I'm a bit of a weirdo when it comes to the draft. I don't know I think you're similar in some ways, but I don't like talking until I'm done. I keep very quiet. I said I don't do a mock. I did a mock like 2 days ago. That was it. I don't release anything. And then when I'm like done, I'm like, now I want to talk about it. So I feel like some people have got draft fatigue and I'm like the opposite. Like I could go and record another show straight after this on the receivers or safeties. Like I'm sort of ready to go. But also the bad thing of that is the edge was like the second position I did. So I've spent the last like 48 hours before the show just rearranging my board like 15 times because I'm like, do I really want him in this tier? And then I'm going back and watching again because you know what it's like. You've watched him so long ago. You're like, oh, what did I actually say about him? Why did I say that? So it's all good fun. But yeah, I'm looking forward to this. I think you're the Fangio man. You know what Fangio wants in an edge. I have my own bias and my own traits. But I'm also a Fangio man at heart because I've been watching this defense for a while. So I think I have a different thing I look for. But yeah, I'm looking forward to this one. Always like talking edge.
Very nice, very nice. You've been with Bleeding Green Nation off and on, I'd say, for 10 years, full-time writer for 6. Do I got that right?
Yes, you do indeed. Yeah, a while. A lot of film. A lot of film has been watched. So yeah, they've been doing this with Shane, for a couple of years until we met on BGN podcast. They shut that down because that's the world we live in. So we did our own thing, basically. And yeah, been doing this for a couple of years now. But I still feel like podcasting is not my thing. I've done many a show, but to me, I'm a writer at heart. So I always feel like podcasting is different. It's very, still, there's a part of me that, it's not as easy. It's much easier to write for me, but everyone's different, I guess.
Well, you could have fooled me and most of the listening public because you're talking all over the place. And
yes, I know.
All right, so today we're going to be talking about the edge class. We're both going to each come with our top 10 edge players. This is Eagles focused, so we're not going to have a few guys at the top of this class involved in the conversation since they will be gone well before 23. For example, Bain will be gone. Reese, if you consider him an edge, will probably be gone. Bailey will probably also be gone. So we're not going to talk about those three today. We're going to focus on the edge defenders that the Eagles actually have a legitimate shot of getting. Now, I have a feeling that Johnny goes for the edge that's explosive, that's pass rushing, that puts fear in the heart of the offensive tackle. They're going to get around that edge. Whereas I'm more the blue collar guy. I like my edges who set the edge versus the run. They're very good in pursuit out to the sidelines and in space. They can drop in coverage a little bit. If they can pass rush, that's added bonus for me. Now, don't get me wrong. I do realize that pass rush is important, but unless it's a unicorn pass rusher and edge, I'm more interested in the other aspects. It's almost like, as far as edge rushers go, I'm more attracted to the nerdy librarian, and Johnny's more attracted to, the hottie at Starbucks sipping on a latte.
Yeah, that's how everyone describes Malachi Lawrence, the hottie at Starbucks. Yes, I think you are partly correct. I'm a sucker for an explosive first step. What can I say?
Well, I'm sure that as we go through our top 10 lists, we'll discover we have more in common.
I would just say just quickly, because I think you're right. I think I put my own bias on it, but my ranking is like my own version of where I want the Eagles scheme to go. So for me, tiers are always a big deal. We are ranking today, but I will point out when I have players similarly graded, let's say. I would say, and I think I'm with you on this, I think we can actually agree on this. For me, anyway, I'm less fussed about individual pass rushing moves because I think a lot of Fangio is about scheme pressure. A lot of it is about sim pressure. So I do look at coverage as well. And one of the things I sometimes struggle with the big run defenders is I'm like, can you drop just enough? Fangio drops Brandon Graham. Fangio drops everyone, but can you actually, drop and look half decent at it and not be completely useless at dropping? And the second thing is that means that I look more for just straight up explosive speed because I'm thinking of stunts. I'm thinking of twists. I'm thinking of unblocked pressure. I'm thinking that if we can get you half a second where you're not blocked because the offensive line's confused, how quickly can you burst through? I'm probably less interested in like, oh my God, what a spin move. He's got a bag of tricks, as you know, the analysts will say. You're all going to tell me now I'm a complete hypocrite when I tell you my number one, because he is one of them. But outside of him, I'm rarely, to me, like, I think that's where maybe we can agree. Maybe we don't. But I think for me, it's maybe at the edge position, it's more about scheme pressure. And maybe interior-wise, that's where the pass rushing really kicks in these days. You might argue your defensive tackle pass rush is more important because they're never getting unblocked pressure. Like Jalen Carter and Joe Moan Davis are winning one-on-one or one-on-two every single time. Whereas if you think of like Jalix Hunt sacks last year, he wasn't beating people one-on-one very often. He wasn't bending the edge and dipping and ripping. A lot of the time, it's winning by scheme rather than by talent. And I think there's a reason why Hunt and Smith are both like run defenders who are big physical guys who can drop. They're not pass rushers to me. So maybe we agree a little bit there. I'm not after the toolsy players, but I am after the first step players, because for me, it's like you've got half a second where the tackle's dropped and he's not sure who he's blocking and you've got a free run to the quarterback. I want you to go in a hurry. But yeah, I think, you might value run defense a little bit more, but that's all good.
Certainly, yeah. I think of it as almost like some defensive coordinators, they think, get to third down, and then you can dial up the pressure, and you don't necessarily have to have the elite edge rushers. An elite edge rusher would certainly be nice, don't get me wrong, or even just solid edge rushers. But if you can't get the third down, what's the point? Especially on early downs, Fangio likes to put his defensive linemen in conflict. His defensive tackles are thinking screen pass before they're thinking get the quarterback. His defensive ends are thinking I have to contain out to the sidelines if there's a run or a reverse or a fly sweep, a jet sweep. I have to contain before I fly upfield at the quarterback and be responsible about stopping the run. So it's not like Fangio in this scheme takes the leash off of his defensive linemen and just lets them go. A lot of times he doesn't let them go until second and very long or even third down. And at that point, you could sort of dial up pressure because you don't have to defend the runs. So that's kind of the way I look at it. But all right, let's roll into it. Do you want to go first or me?
I'll go first, seeing as I've just called myself a hypocrite. So despite everything I just said, and by the way, I totally agree with you and what you just said. And I think for me, actually, and we'll get into this, maybe because the league isn't where Fangio is, I sometimes think you can get some of those run defenders later, which is why earlier on I'm still maybe prioritizing like movement traits. So despite what I just said about like the bag of tricks, not picking that guy, I didn't think I'd have this guy one at the top of my board. I'm not convinced the Eagles will, but I really, really, really liked Malachi Lawrence. He is more of a pass rusher to me. So he is a guy that has moves. His testing was like outrageous. He tested as well as anyone, like 4.52. I mentioned the 1.59 split as well. I said that first step is really important for me. 40 vertical, like long arms as well. Production, which edge is always difficult to get as well. Nearly 20 sacks the past 3 years. So for me, I don't think he's a bend the edge guy as much. I don't think he's particularly bendy. So he's not, if you're thinking of like your old school Von Miller, like bend the edge, that kind of flexibility. He's a little bit more pass rushy for me, but it's his first step. It's first step quickness. It's very smooth. He has just enough mass for me, though. That's where he was different than some of the lighter guys like the Cassius Howe, and why I have Malachi Lawrence above was because he was 253. I think he's bigger. So I don't think he can do it right now, as in the early down run stuff. I think at times he was a little bit all over the place. And I think what Fangio won't like, was you mentioned about the reverses. Sometimes he loses sight of the ball tracker and he's just like a little bit like unsure where to go. Overall, though, I think he's inexperienced as well. Didn't play a lot. I think he has the size where you can coach the run stuff on early downs. And I think he's got enough movement and like fluidity to his game that he would excel on like stunts and twists. So I guess because we're going to differ, and I expect we're going to differ, maybe when we bring up someone, we should talk about like sort of where we have them roughly as well. So I actually didn't have a straight round one tier player in any edge. For me, outside of the top two, they were all like, I could see them, this particular group, I could see them like end of round one, start of round two. So I'm not saying I'm like jumping off the screen at 23, draft Malachi Lawrence. But he would be the top guy that I have outside of the big three.
Very nice, very nice. He also has some pretty darn good hand fighting from what I've noticed.
Yes, he can rush.
Yeah. I did see some tightness in the ankles, like you were referring to. He's not as bendy as you would hope for. But so explosive. He was explosive on tape, and he measured explosively as well. He's basically exactly how you write up an edge rusher in terms of relative athletic score. That's what you want. So it was interesting to me that he didn't produce more, given that insane talent he had on top of the strong hand fighting. There were a couple times where I felt like he was losing steam during the game, almost like his endurance wasn't ideal. You mentioned how he had some trouble defending the run when he was in conflict. I'm a little concerned about that. I'm not super concerned because the NFL isn't as creative as college football in terms of as much misdirection, as much option football as they play. When they run options in the NFL, it's usually more of a standard read option, which I think he can handle. If it's true option football, yeah, he gets lost. He gets lost. But, and he's pretty solid holding his gap against the run, and he certainly has speed and violence to set that edge and chase to the sidelines if he is the primary force player, if he's the guy responsible for that outside gap all the way to the sidelines. So I think it's perfectly reasonable that you have him number one on this list. And I agree with your overall sentiment that all of these edge players are at earliest late first round players and after.
There you go. We don't fully disagree on one then. So give me your one then. Who have you got at the top of your next tier?
Yeah, Malachi Lawrence was actually my number 6.
Okay, I have a feeling I know who the few you're going to have are above him, but I'll save it.
There were a couple things he did, even as a pass rusher, where I felt like he should have had more production, where he'd sort of beat the offensive tackle, going back to Malachi Lawrence. And he'd have a step on the offensive tackle, and the offensive tackle would sort of be on his back shoulder, and he would do a backward swipe. But for some reason, he was too focused on backward swiping. I thought it was weird when he had a clear path to the quarterback. It felt like he left several quarterback hits on the table that he could have had.
Yeah, I don't know if this is the same, but I wrote him, and sometimes I obviously, like everyone, I just write random notes. I wrote at one point, he seems to get knocked off, like, in the air. Like, he has this weird tendency. I don't know how you describe it, where, I don't know if, as you said, he, like, slowed down, but he's always getting, like, knocked off balance, and, like, both his feet were gone. It was a weird, like, thing I noticed a couple of times in one of the games, and I don't think that's the same thing you're talking about, but there is a little bit of weirdness to his game. He is not polished, and I agree with that. If he was polished to me, he'd be a clear first round value for me. So yeah, I sort of know what you mean. I don't know if I'm saying the exact same thing, but there was a couple of, like, quirky parts of his game where you're a bit like, oh, okay, despite the fact that, as I said, I really like him. I don't think he's like a smooth, I'm guaranteed prospect, like 12.5 sacks every year, here we come. There are parts of his game that are slightly odd still.
They're trying to bend the edge while the offensive tackle was on his back shoulder. He had trouble bending around with that extra push on him. It might tie into what I noticed with his ankle flexion and what you're saying about his balance. So maybe it's a physical thing. I thought it might be a coachable mental thing where he can increase his production. But it could be either. We really don't know. But it's definitely interesting.
Who have you got?
My number 1 is Cassius Howell, actually.
I did not think you were going to say that. I did not think you would have it. That's made me feel a lot better about my board. All right, you talk to me about why you have him so high, and then I'll give you what I've got.
So I'm going to start off by saying, if I'm making this pick, I'm having a chat with Vic Fangio. I'm having a chat with Howie. I'm saying, look, this guy is not a full-time edge. I don't want him every down in the 4-2-5, with the wide nines, playing out there versus the run all game long. I don't want that. I do want him to play on the edge, like in the 5-2 front, their base front, where they have 5 guys down, and maybe have somebody do a little 2-gapping next to him to help out with the run. I don't think he's a hopeless run defender. I feel like he does hold his primary gap pretty well against the run, and I love his second effort. I love how low his center of gravity is, but he looks like a linebacker. He sort of plays like a linebacker. He has arms that are less than 31 inches long, which is not exactly edge rusher arms. He's explosively quick. He's got some pretty good bend, really low center of gravity. So he can definitely pass rush on the edge, and I think there's a lot of opponents where he will flat out abuse pass rushing on the edge. This was a high production guy. He had good pressure rates, good sacks. In addition to that, he had a bunch of passes defended. I'm like, how's he getting these passes defended? Well, most of them were him whacking the quarterback's arm as he's running by, and that would count as a pass defended. So he's getting production in all kinds of ways, and he did make plenty of plays against the run. He's just not somebody who's going to affect the secondary gap against the run. He's not somebody you want in the 4-2-5 taking on offensive linemen all day long. In the Miami game, I remember he faced 2 NFL-type offensive linemen, large, strong dudes, and it wasn't a good look for him. He did not look like a first-round defensive end. So, but my thing is, he is such a good football player. He does not have the issues playing in conflict like Malachi Lawrence does. His pursuit, his stamina, top-notch. His quickness is top-notch. His desire is top-notch. His bag of tricks as a pass rusher is top-notch. So to me, I'd be talking to Vic, I'd be talking to Howie, and I'd say, look, play him some on the edge as a 5-2, but give him some extra protection so he doesn't have to affect the secondary gap. Obviously, play him on the edge on 3rd and long or 3rd downs when you want him to rush the passer, especially if he has a good matchup. But on some neutral downs, maybe we can play him off the ball. He looks like a linebacker. He plays like a linebacker. He makes decisions like a linebacker at the line of scrimmage versus the run in conflict. Why not use him at some of both? And if Vic scoffed at that, he probably would not be my number one.
Interesting. So he's my number 3. So I'm high on him as well. And to be honest, he's in that tier with Malachi Lawrence that you could, for me, there's 4 that there's quite a big tier break for me between the top 4 I have and then 5 to like 10. So you could, for me, if you were to argue like I want to take Howe, and actually the thing you said about off ball wasn't something I thought of, I wouldn't argue against him. He is a weird guy. Like physically, he's odd, and I know you spoke about this. Like the arms and the wingspan are non-existent, which is where I gave Malachi Lawrence a little bit of a jump. But he's better production. To your point, like his college production in 56 games, like 27 sacks, and you mentioned 15 pass breakups, which is odd. Over 35 tackles for loss. Like he's a properly good player, like a very good college player. He does bend. He can bend more. He's one of those guys that can like sometimes get the quarterback without being touched, because he just like moves around them in a way that the guy's not expecting it. Like to me, he's a little bit more bendy than Malachi Lawrence. But I guess the reason why I had him lower was the simple reason, sort of what you hinted at, was I think that he's just got less as a run defender. He is a little bit bigger than, as we mentioned as well. He's not like a totally tiny guy. I think he weighed in 253 as well at the combine, which is the exact same as Malachi Lawrence, which surprised me a little bit because I didn't think he played that big in film, if I'm honest with you. But my question was like, can he take on like pulling guards? Like, can he set the edge the way Vic wants him to? So I, in some ways though, didn't care about that, because I said, I don't think he's going to be, as you said, an every down starter. He's not going to start in the 4-2-5 on first down all the time. As long as you use him in a certain way, that's why I still like him. And I ended up by saying, literally in my own notes, it was, I like him as a late first, early second. I said 23 is probably too rich for him, but it's a weak draft class and I'd be perfectly fine with it. What he's got going for him is, as you mentioned over Malachi, is production. So I didn't think that would be your first guy, but when you sold me as like the off-ball hybrid guy as well, then I can see what you mean. My question would just be like, can he play the run on early downs, or is he just limited? But do you know what? If you get a really good pass rusher who, as you said, you can hide a bit and he can still give you 25 to 30 snaps a game as elite production, that's worth an end of the first round pick, especially in this draft class where he's no less raw than some of the OTs they're looking at that time. So it's, for me, it's worth it. But I'm glad you liked him. I knew you liked him because I remember you put the video up about him, but I didn't know you would be that high on him as your top one. I haven't compared production, but I would guess outside of the top 3, there's not many that are as productive as he was in college. I know his pass rush PFF win rate is always very, very high consistently, and you don't often see that in the draft. You see like 1 or 2 like spikes, but he's consistently done it. So I like it. We don't fully disagree there because he's my 3.
Now, Vic Fangio teased me a little bit last year with something called mint front, which he only used a handful of times here and there. But it was basically a way to get into an odd front where you have 3 defensive tackles on the field and keep a nickel on the field as well. And they would stunt out of it. They would send a lot of creepers out of it the few times they did it. I'm talking like 10 times, something like that. And the stunting and the creepers was a way to stay sturdy against the run. And I feel like it could be a way to have Howe and our 2 linebackers on the field all together at the same time without being at a disadvantage versus the run. It's almost like you don't know where that fourth rusher is coming from on early downs.
Yeah, which gets back to what we said to earlier on about caring more about that first step quickness than just a generic bend the edge rusher, because it's more about confusion, isn't it, than it is just about purely one-on-one, go win your matchup. Yeah, interesting. It sounds like we're in a similar tier for him as well. So would you be comfortable with him at 23?
I would. I wouldn't throw a hissy fit. It wouldn't be my move.
Yeah.
But if I would be comfortable with it, and if Vic Fangio was comfortable digging into his odd front scheme and getting away from the 4-2-5, I'd be a lot more comfortable with it, actually. It might be a very smart pick, but that's where you have to align the prospect's strengths and weaknesses with the defensive coordinator, who might be set in his ways.
Yeah. I think Vic would probably be okay with it. But like you said, you can't tell. I think when you look at who he's added, I think the good thing for me is that he's 253 at the combine. Because some of the other speedy rushers, which we'll get to, are not that size. So I think, as you said, there is some run defense stuff. If you compare him to some of the others I might have in my second tier that are significantly lighter.
Nice.
Right, I'll take my second then. I think my second, is a guy you like, but I think is a guy that is very controversial. And I think actually most reports on him are pretty clear. I know Shane's out on him, and I totally get why. I had Akeem Massador, and very high for a 25-year-old. I mean, 25 at the draft. I don't love the idea of a medical guy, of problems with his medicals as well. I think he's had in the past. He's had injuries. For me, I just think the film was good. Like, I really like the film. I think with the more I watched him, he can drop into coverage as well, which I really, really liked. Like, I think he might be the best coverage edge that I like. There was games that I saw when he just like covered the flat, but he just looked so smooth doing it. And he can rush the quarterback. The obvious issue for Massador is the age and the fact that he didn't get particularly good until he got to his certain age. He hasn't been like consistently good in college. He's also not the best run defender, which is odd because he's like 260 pounds, and you think someone who's been in college for that long would have developed that. So that's a concern for me. And that is one of the things that I'm like, I was a little bit unsure about because of the run stuff. And I don't actually know if I would take him at 23 because I don't have medical stuff. So I'll be honest, like, the team will know more than me. He might drop because he's had a lot of concerns. But you mentioned hand fighting earlier on for Malachi Lawrence. I think Massador's better at that, in my opinion. I think that when you look at like fumbles, like strip sacks, the way he attempts to fumble when he sacks the quarterback as well was really good. I just really liked his film. And I'll be honest, I went in there going, don't want him, because we're all biased in this world. We all read things. And I read about his age and I was like, yeah. I mean, I watched the film, and the more I watched, the more I like. So I don't love him again at this high. But I said that about all the edges. Would I jump at 23 to take him? Not really. If they could trade down and get him, would I be okay with it if the medicals are clear? Yeah. I think if you can get good pass rushing production for 5 years or so, when it comes to sports, I'm always more about the here and now than the future. And I see that in all the sports I follow. I think sometimes people can worry too much about like, oh, well, he's 20. So in 8 years' time, he'll be great. And I'm like, well, not if he doesn't get any better. Like, development is not linear. And if you think he's good enough now, and you think he can give you 5 years now, and then you let him go at the end of his 5th-year option when he's 30, I still think that's worthy of a late first-round pick if he's good. So I'm sort of ignoring the age a little bit here. I totally understand if Howie, someone who's dealing for his job for 5-10 years down the line, he's not just worried about the here and now. He goes, yeah, we're not drafting a 24-year-old with injury concerns this high. But I'm not really judging that because I haven't got access to the stuff that they've got access to. So I'm partly ignoring it. So I ended up with him as my second.
Very legitimate. This is where we differ the most so far, very early in these rankings. I don't have him on my list, mainly because of the age that you referenced.
Yeah, and that's totally fair.
I will say you also mentioned the run defense, and I was kind of surprised. He's one of two guys on this list who we're going to probably talk about today, where I was surprised. I was expecting more run defense than I saw.
Yeah. And I was similar. We all judge biases. First thing I do when I watch a player is how big are they? And I see an edge that's his size and his experience. And I'm like, oh, he'll play the run. But he doesn't. I don't know if it's his arm length problem. I don't really know what it is. He doesn't tackle well, which sometimes is a basic thing about run defense. Like, I don't like missed tackle stats because they're incredibly flawed, but he doesn't tackle well. Like he launches a lot. He's got like really bad tackling technique, which I don't know if at his age he's going to change. So I totally get that. I think he's a little bit more sub packagey, even though he's 260. And I'll be honest, I've gone massively back and forth with him and Cassius Howell. And even now I'm looking at it and I was like, I could put Messidor at 4, 2, or 3. I'm so close on those guys. I've sort of ignored the age and medical. But yeah, just personal thing that I don't like talking about things I don't know much about. So the medical stuff, I'm like, I don't.
He was a good pass rusher from the edge, but the rushing that I was more impressed with from him was when he was slid into like a 3-tech inside, and that was pretty nifty, the interior pass rush. Between the lack of run defense, the age, and that we already have good interior pass rushers, it just didn't feel like my cup of tea. But
yeah, I think the coverage was the thing that I look for a lot as well, and I was impressed with that, and I didn't see that out of a lot of them. Like there was a couple of screen passes that he blew up, and I was like, oh, just little things about his coverage. I quite enjoyed. I was quite surprised by how he moved because, again, biased. I see 260. I'm like, is he going to be able to play in coverage? But I think he could, and I didn't see that from a lot of the edge. So yeah, first one you haven't got, and I've got. Who's a 2 for you then?
Next up for me is Keldrick Falk.
I knew we were going to differ on him slightly, but that's okay. I knew we were. I'm lower than consensus, but sell me on him.
Okay. Length, strength, size, 4'6", 40, solid 10-yard split. I think. I got to double check the 10. Let me double check that.
I knew you would like Keldrick Falk.
He's kind of my default.
Brugler has him 15 in the class. Like
That's
some
insane.
people really like him.
That's insane.
He's young as well.
10 years. Okay. So Keldrick Falk, he has length, he has strength. He's your father's defensive end. He's old school. He's not these light, tiny guys who run around. Now, I don't have a size thing. Like, for example, my number 1 was Cassius Howell, who's too small. My number 2 is Falk, who's not particularly fleet of foot or agile, but is rather large. So long as they can get it done, that's what I'm more concerned with. I do feel like he has some untapped upside. I see him detach from offensive linemen pretty easily when he extends those arms, and he has the good arm length, 34-plus inch arms. I see shock in his hands against the run. That wouldn't be enough for me alone, but also he does seem to have the mobility on tape and testing-wise to get out in pursuit, out to the sidelines. So to me, he's kind of a fit for Fangio because he can play that wide 9 in the 4-2-5 and be an asset against the run. In addition to that, he can be an asset on stunts. If the tight end's lined up next to him, they could do some funky stuff with him and the linebacker doing a late gap exchange like Brandon Graham used to do with our linebackers. He collapses the pocket. Now, the pass rush, it's not there yet. Obviously, it needs to be worked on. But when I see the way he's able to detach from offensive linemen, sometimes good ones, mid-pass rush, and when I see how he has the strength to collapse the pocket, I'm betting on the possibility that the pass rush will eventually come, at least to an adequate extent. He only had 2 sacks this year, but he did have 7 sacks the year before.
Yeah.
This is going to be only his age 21 season, and he is 276 pounds, 6'6". That's some good size. It's some good size, some good measurables, some pretty good tape. And he provides something that I feel like we currently lack in our edge room because Nolan Smith, obviously he's a heck of an edge defender versus the run. And he can do all these Fangio things that we want to see. However, he has trouble staying healthy. Last year, it looked like he was playing with like 1.25 arms. His triceps clearly was not healed on his one arm. He was not the same guy. And he has a history of those soft tissue injuries over and over, and going back to college. Is he going to be playing in all 17 games? And if he does, is he going to be the same guy? Last year, I felt like he was only 70, 80% himself. Yeah. He wasn't the same guy he was down the stretch leading into that Super Bowl, that's for sure. And then you have our other edge, who I love, Jalex Hunt, good football player, but he is a little bit on the lighter side, and it shows sometimes versus the run. He doesn't shock offensive tackles and affect the secondary gap, the B gap, as often from that 4-2-5 wide alignment the way Nolan Smith does. The defensive end that we signed in free agency for around $7 million, Ebikebi, I can't pronounce his name, sorry.
also light.
Also light, and, he did have some troubles on tape setting the edge versus the run from what I saw. He took on pullers well. I like that a lot. But just taking on offensive linemen and sometimes even tight ends on the edge, he certainly wasn't not going to affect the secondary gap from what I saw, and just, did his best just to stay in his primaries. We had an injury to Nolan Smith the first part of the year, and he was gone. And we had these backups come off the bench that were designated pass rusher types, and it affected our run defense. It was hard to get the third down. So I feel like because of that, looking at team need, looking at our current room, that's why someone like Falk is attractive to me. Also, if Fangio gets into his oddball fronts, sometimes he does a condensed front where he takes his wide defensive ends and brings them down to either a 4-tech or a 5-tech just outside, thick on the offensive tackle's shoulder, and then he'll have a linebacker outside as an overhang just outside the edge player. He can do that. He has the strength to win tight. He doesn't need to build up momentum and whack the offensive tackle the way Nolan Smith does. He can just lean on him and extend. He's almost like a defensive tackle that way, or a 3-4 defensive end if you think about it. At the goal line, he has value against the run. If they want to go heavy with their personnel, they already got a heavy player on the field. I see him as an asset in the goal line and in short yardage situations. And on early downs, if he's in that 4-2-5, like I mentioned, he's mobile enough. I think he can pursue out to the sidelines. So it's just that pass rush. Is it going to come or isn't it?
Yeah, we actually don't disagree that much. I think, again, it comes down to the joy of the draft, of how you see it. I did have him as my 5, by the way. So not as low as you might think. But for me, where he is consensus-wise, he's a lot higher. So I think his consensus in the teens or 20s, I said Brugler has him at 15 in the Beast. And I was like, oh, that's significantly higher than me. The thing that I had, and I agreed with you, and you stole my thunder, because the first thing I was going to talk about was how the Eagles need a bigger defensive end. So when Bourne comes down as the overhang, or even Campbell next year as well, someone can kick inside. And I don't know if the Eagles have that, especially without Brandon Graham, whether he's there or even plays. So he fits that role because he can play like 5 technique. He can come inside and take on. There was times in his film that I watched him just blow up tight ends, like just straight up wreck them. And you were like, yeah, he's good. Like he's a proper run defender. You said he's a big boy, and it's not just weight, it's length. He's long. He's very, very top heavy, which is a good thing. For me, it was very simple. It was just, why don't I have him in that? And I don't have him in that tier with the others. So although he's 5, there is like a drop off between 4 and 5 to me, where I wouldn't like him in the first round personally. The one thing I would give him is his age. As you said, can he develop it? He got 7 sacks when he was like 19 or something. So it is there. I just didn't see, I'm going to say the first step. I just didn't see it. Didn't see like the pop. I do worry a little bit more than you about his lateral movement. Can he get like out in space? Can he cover the flat? Can he like chase and sort of like carry us in pursuit outside? But I just didn't see. I wanted to see just like a little bit for a young guy, just a little bit of like a first step. And some of that's probably just because he's 276. So you're not going to get that explosive first step. It's just profile. I think Fangio will love him on early downs. I think he'll be a really, really good fit for all the reasons you outlined. For me, if you're talking about like taking an edge in the first, I want a guy who got more than 2 sacks last year. And I know it's a basic measure. I know it's a basic statistic, but I just want a little bit more juice. And I didn't see that quickness. But I wouldn't hate it. I'm not so out on Falk. You know how the NFL draft's weird, where you become negative about a player because it's consensus, not because you dislike them. So I sound like, oh, you must hate Falk because consensus is 15, and when I have put my ball together, he'll probably end up, I don't know where I'd end up, but in like the 30s. And then you'll read my report and you'll be like, oh, like I described him as like very, very long frame, awful run defender, physical tools and run game presence, give him a very high floor as a run defender. But the pass rushing stuff's a big work in progress. And I sort of feel like that's how you described him as well. It's just when you're lower than consensus, you hate the guy. When you're higher than consensus, he's your favorite player in the world. I think I'm just a bit lower. I see someone like Brugler having 15, and I think I'm not comfortable with someone at 15 until they can rush the QB better. But for all the reasons you outlined, I wouldn't be annoyed at it at 23. I do think he's a good football player, and he's definitely got age on his side. When we spoke about Messidor just now, he is significantly younger. So he has more room to grow. But I think, as you said, whether he does or not is a question mark.
Yeah, it is a question mark. I at least see him as a rotational edge at a minimum.
And he's a high floor.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not Howie Roseman. I don't have the stomach he does for risk. So when I see that high floor, I like that floor. You know what I'm saying? I see a guy I have no doubts I can put in there in my rotation, and he'll be effective and productive in at least some kind of way. So that's very big to me. Definitely 15 is too high, though. I wouldn't do that.
It's a massive bet on projection, isn't it? It's a bit of
Yes.
it's an upside shot. If
Yes.
you're taking someone at 15, you need more than an early down.
I probably wouldn't even take him at 23, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I wouldn't hate it. I wouldn't hate it if we did, but I probably would not. So we already know how.
Yeah, I can skip my third, so we might be going back to you, unless you want a break and you want me to do my fourth.
No, that's fine. My third is going to be a little strange. I get it. This is the part where I start getting a little weird. You know, it becomes obvious I'm not a true GM and just a wannabe, if you know what I'm saying. So next up for me is a guy who is in most people's top 10s in the defensive tackle room. But when I turned on his tape, I saw Brandon Graham, but just a little fatter. Brandon Graham with 30 pounds of weight that he could easily lose. And I'm talking about Peter Woods from Clemson.
Interesting. Okay.
Now,
talk to me.
Yeah, so I turned on this tape from this year, and I immediately started kind of like not liking what I was watching. You could tell that they knew he could not take on multiple blockers from the defensive tackle position on the interior. So they were stunting constantly stunting and penetrating. And that could be a little hit or miss sometimes. You know, you might be able to get your TFL that way. If you're not careful about it, you might give up a 40-yard run. And I think that's part of the reason why Clemson was worse on defense this year. At least reportedly they were. I haven't checked the statistics. And they were disappointing. And he just didn't feel right as a defensive tackle to me. And I'm thinking to myself, my God, he looks like Brandon Graham. Just a slightly shorter armed, slightly larger Brandon Graham. Why isn't he a 5-tech? Why isn't he out on the edge using his power? And he is, you know, he's a large man. He's not going to win too many track meets, but he's nimble. And he's a good football player. And he has some decent strength to him, just not, I'm going to take on two offensive linemen in the run game type strength on the interior. So I was like, maybe they used him more at 5-tech in 2024. So I went back to his 2024 tape, and lo and behold, the very first game I watched, something like 8 out of the first 10 snaps, he was on the edge. And I hadn't seen him on the edge once in the 25 tape that I watched. I might be exaggerating slightly. And boy, he was even fatter in 2024. He was 20 pounds heavier, and it was fat, not muscle. So I feel comfortable saying that. He was 20 pounds heavier in 2024 than he is now in 2025, and yet they had him playing outside on the edge way more often as like a 5-tech, and he looked so much more natural out there. He was basically a poor man's version of Brandon Graham. So he lost 20 pounds this past year, thinking he'd become a penetrating defensive tackle, but I think he's got to lose another 10, 15 pounds and become a Brandon Graham style defensive end. So it's quite a projection, but considering I do want to stop the run because of the way I've talked about the state of our current edge room, someone like him moving a defensive tackle out to like a 5-tech or out to edge is something that does interest me.
Well, believe it or not, and I know this because I made a note of it, you are not the only person that said that. Which might surprise you, because it surprised me. And I'll be honest, I'm a little bit more basic when it comes to the NFL. So I normally look at the position. Safety and cornerback's a bit different. You have to sort of combine the two. But I just ranked him as defensive tackle. Like I didn't have the guts to put him somewhere else. But what I do with draft stuff is I always watch them myself, and then I look around the league and see what people that I trust are saying, because I do impact my rankings because I can't watch 15 games. And I've mentioned him on the past. He's a little bit in trouble at the moment. But Ollie Connolly, actually on his podcast, and I wrote it down because I was like, that's a weird thing to say. So I stuck it in like my notes section. So he said he didn't like him that much. He called him a rotational like player, blah, blah, blah. But he then said at the end, it was like a throwaway comment. He said, I wonder if he might be better as a heavy end in an even front and dropping a little bit more weight. So you're not the only person that's seen it. So you're not going mad. That there is obviously someone else out there. And he wasn't saying he should. He just mentioned that could he be like standard defensive end in a 4-man front? I don't think it's crazy. Obviously, he can't do all this. He's not going to drop into coverage. He's not going to do the whole like he's not going to be a full-time player there. But considering the way the edge class is, and considering the defensive tackle class sucks as well, by the way, quite a lot, I think it's when you get to like that second round pick, if you see something in someone and you think he could work for you, that's where the draft is like weird and wonderful. I think it's probably unlikely to happen because the odds are that someone will take him as a defensive tackle beforehand. But he is that weird size, like that 290, where like you're not really anything. You're not really going to be a full. So if a coach might say to him, listen, drop 10 or 20 pounds, and as long as you can keep your strength up, I reckon you could play as an edge in an even front. You could play 5 technique or whatever. So interesting. It's weird that I think when you said it, my brain went, because I've got my edge rankings up, but I was like, I've heard someone mention him, and I remember thinking it was strange. So I was quickly going through my defensive tackle notes. And yeah, Ollie saw the same thing. So I didn't really watch him and look at it like that. So he's obviously not going to be in my list because that wasn't something I considered. I had him in round 2 as a defensive tackle. I didn't love him, but I wasn't watching him through the prism of how you were watching him. So that's an interesting name. When like the phrase, when there's smoke, there's fire, if there's 2 people that I trust their opinion a lot have said something similar, then you can bet there's NFL guys that are watching him and going, can we ask him to do this? So interesting. And this is not a comparison, but I have him in a similar ballpark to like my Keldrick Fault, that tier. So if I saw him similarly to you, he would be around like the 5 to 10. He still wouldn't break my top for you just in terms of where I had him ranked. But that's a strange name I wasn't expecting you to say. But there you go. Was that just purely on film? You just saw something and you were like, was it the Brandon Graham thing? It just sort of clicked in your head. It's funny how that happens, isn't it? You see someone else when you watch someone.
Yeah, I saw some highlights of him, and even on just the highlights before I delved into his tape, I'm like, is this a defensive tackle? I'm not
He's
sure.
Light. He is light.
And the tape immediately confirmed this is not a Vic Fangio defensive tackle. At least it shouldn't be. Not on early downs. He would get destroyed.
And I always think when you measure like 298 at the combine as a defensive tackle, I'm like, you're really light because you don't want to weigh 298. Like you've been told to put on weight. If you're trying to get drafted as a defensive tackle, hit that 300 number. So that's probably like maybe not even playing weight as well.
Yeah, probably not.
Yeah, I wrote in my notes for him, by the way. I don't even know if he can do free technique stuff. I said I think he might be 4-eye. I'm not sure he was big enough to even do it. So yeah, his size is interesting. Could he drop a little bit more and play a little bit more on the edge? Obviously a very different type of edge defender, but I wasn't expecting you to say that. That is more shocking than Cassius Howard wanted to be.
I'm full of shocks. I'm just getting warmed up too.
Oh, good. Right, let's move on, or we'll be here for 5 hours on edge.
Who's your number 4?
Yeah, my number 4 is true to how I see the position. Anyone that's heard probably knows who I'm going to pick. You're not going to like it, and even I don't like it too much because of how light the Eagles are. But I had R. Mason Thomas as my 4, and I wrote down just pure fire off the edge. It's all first step quickness, flexibility. It's all like bend the edge. The reason why I really liked him though was the stuff in stunt and twists. Like that's where I liked him for Fangio. But even I, who likes him, very clearly have a lot of problems in the run game. Like he will struggle to set the edge. He will struggle to hold the point of attack. Even tight ends took him for a little bit of a spin. He's very raw, but if I'm going back to this class not being particularly good, I literally wrote in my notes, I think he will be unbelievably good when the Eagles run stunts and twists because he's just so quick trigger. It's just like immediate upfield. It's just like bang and he's off. But I said I think I wouldn't take him in the first. He's more of a fantastic shot in the second. He's a little bit similar to Cassius Howard, how I saw them. The difference is I think he's lighter. I wrote down he's not an every down player. He's not an every down base end, but he's a good fit for a modern defense that relies heavily on stunts and simulated pressures. And that's why I liked him. But I would not be surprised if you did not like him the same way because the run stuff is a problem. He was a bit more like Hassan Reddick for me. And obviously I've seen him have success with Eagles. So he was the last one in that tier for me in like the first one, but he is a pure, like my kind of edge rusher. And I think unless the Eagles are after a pure sub rusher, they wouldn't consider him that early.
He's a good football player. And I enjoyed watching him. I really did. I did a breakdown of him matched up versus Proctor, and he had his way with Proctor. That was late season when Proctor had already lost most of his weight that he had on early in the season. And Good football player. I have him off my top 10 just because of, like you said, I'm concerned about defending the run, and he might be more of a DPR type, designated pass rusher type, but good
He
football
is.
player.
He is absolutely a pass rusher, and I think if the current edge room wasn't as it is, I would have him a little bit. I'd be a little bit more bullish on him. But you have to look at the current Eagles edge, and you go, I still think there's room for one more. Like in some ways, I don't love I can't pronounce his name either, the Arnold, whatever you want to call him, Epitike signing, because in my ways, it does like limit you a little bit because you're like, do you want another light guy? Like, I'd sort of rather that had been a heavy edge presence, because then I'd have been like, oh, you know what? Free hit, take whoever you want. I think because he's a little bit light as well, you're like, they do need some mass there. But still, I like my guy, so I'm putting my guy where I liked him. I don't think he's a realistic pick for the Eagles earlier on, but who knows? I do think simulated pressure-wise, like stance and twist, Fangio will really like that side of him because he is quick. He is like, I don't actually know if he ran. I don't think his 40 was like particularly fast, but for me, like explosiveness wise, he was up there with anyone in terms of just get off.
He's one of like two guys, and it's more him than even the other guy, where I'm concerned about leaving them off my top 10 because those are words I might end up eating.
Yeah.
And I hope I do for his sake. Good for him if he does make me eat my words, because he's got the eye of the tiger, man. I love watching him pass rush against bigger guys and just asserting his will.
Yeah, you mentioned Proctor. He had a couple of speed to power reps where he like rocked him, and I was like, oh, it's a big man. But pass rushing is different to run defense. And yeah, I think he could make you eat your words if he goes to the right team. I think if there's a team that uses him correctly, but you know what NFL's like, if there's a team that stick him out there on first down as against a run because they drafted him the first round, and therefore the GM's telling the coaches he must play him more, then he's going to struggle. But hopefully that doesn't happen to him.
Absolutely. Utilization is key. And it happens all too often where teams try to put a round peg into a square hole and not use guys to their strengths. And that ties back into my number one player, Cassius Howell. If they don't use him to his strengths, he wouldn't be on my number one. It would be contingent upon that conversation with Vic Fangio behind closed doors.
Yeah, I agree.
If you drafted R. Mason Thomas, you'd have to have a similar conversation.
He got crazy. How crazy are you getting now?
Yeah. This one's not too crazy. Zion Young is my number 4. I knew you like him. He's infectious. His personality in the locker room, I can tell. He's quite the character. He's one of 11 kids. He's the youngest. And let me tell you, on those early downs versus the run, he fights like he's at the dinner table with his 10 brothers and sisters saying, I want to get that second helping of mashed potatoes. He's a warrior, and I love it. He's got adequate length, good strength. I wouldn't say it's dominant strength. I wouldn't say it's Falk level strength like my number 2 guy. But it's good, solid NFL strength. I'd say it's probably slightly more than like a Josh Sweat in the strength department. Not completely overpowering at the NFL level, but good NFL level strength, setting the edge. He combines that strength with flexibility. He's not explosive, but he is very bendy. Between a solid length, good strength, his determination against the run and to be effective on those early downs, his change of direction and pursuit is good. I see him make a ton of second effort plays. He did have 16 or 17 tackles for loss this past season. His senior season, was probably his first bigger production year, 6.5 sacks. Not test, which I'm not surprised. He doesn't look like an explosive runner. He just looks like an adequate runner for the defensive end position. And like I said, I'm drafting him more for the early downs and less for the late downs. He's probably not going to be on the field for me on 3rd and long unless there's an injury in the defensive end room. And even in that case, I might just bring an extra linebacker on the field and just send a creeper or a sim pressure so they don't know where the 4th rusher is coming from. But that's not to say he can't pass rush at all. He's not going to threaten the upfield shoulder a whole lot around the arc with speed and explosiveness, but he's not altogether slow either. I do see the potential for speed to power with him. I do see some inside moves that I noticed him developing later in the season. Max Ihenekor, an offensive tackle that's spoken about quite frequently amongst Philadelphia fans for obvious reasons. In the Senior Bowl, Zion Young gave Ihenekor all he could handle, and he beat him with a good inside move on one of their first pass rush reps. In fact, at the Senior Bowl, and I shouldn't take too much from one-on-ones, but man, all of the best offensive linemen there at the Senior Bowl on his team and practices, he was doing a good job against in pass rush. So it makes me think that despite the lack of explosiveness, he's bendy enough, strong enough, long enough that he can become maybe your 8-sack guy, while being effective on early downs. Infectious on the field, physical, violent, doesn't take plays off, second effort pursuit, mobile enough in space to protect out to the sidelines. He's not going to be as mobile as Jalix Hunt or Nolan Smith in pursuit, but he has adequate pursuit from what I can see. And he can drop in coverage as well from what I saw. So that's Zion Young in a nutshell.
Yeah, I liked him actually. And for the reasons you outlined, not my personal type of guy in terms of who I would look for immediately. I had him at, where's my notes? I had him at edge 7. So a couple below Falk, same tier. I wrote in my notes, I wouldn't take him in the first. I'd take him in the second, though. And a bit like Falk, actually, described him similarly. I said, word for word, long physical edge defender who's not there yet as a pass rusher. But if the Eagles want a more stout edge who can defend the run and early downs, and potentially, I said, develop as a pass rusher because there's something there, I see him as a relatively safe second round pick. Like, I think you sort of know what you're getting, sort of for everything you mentioned. Very rarely gets knocked back. I thought he was a smart player as well. Like, you didn't see him get fooled very often. And also, I love high motor guys. And I did mention, you mentioned about how hard he plays. I mentioned the motor being really good. I think you mentioned about someone earlier on who got, as you watch the game, they got more fatigued. He didn't seem like that play. The kind of guy that, like when he's never going to make a tackle, but he chases it down anyway. I like that. Which is where I agree with you. I wrote, will continue to fight even when he's never going to make a play, which is like the ball carrier's gone, but he's still going to start chasing him back. So I like everything you said. Similar idea. I just wanted a little bit more in the pass rush world. I'd be happy with him in the second because of that, for that reason. We're not actually that different on him in terms of grading. I just have a couple of players that I feel a little bit differently. It's interesting that Falk is significantly higher consensus wise when I didn't see a dramatic difference between them, just personally. If you could tell me Falk at the end of the first, or you can go a whole round later and get Zion Young, I'm do the same, because they could potentially end up filling a very same role for you anyway. So yeah, whereas I had Falk at 5, I had a Zion Young at 7. But I can see what you mean about the infectious quality, because he was one of the first guys I mentioned in terms of the motor being just really good. So yeah, I think we actually agree. And I think you said you wouldn't take him in the first either. Was that correct? He'd be a second round guy for you?
Yeah, I wouldn't go insane if they took him at 23, because 23 is almost like an early second round pick anyway,
exactly.
in terms of grading.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't go insane. I wouldn't hate it. He's somebody that could play right away and play starter snaps in your rotation, but wouldn't be my first choice or my second.
Yeah, I like his size a little bit more than Falk in some ways, because I think you can maybe do a little bit more dropping at 260 as well. Whereas Falk to me is bigger basically, but I think Falk's safer. But yeah, I have them sort of ranked similarly. Who was he? Was he your 4? Sorry, was that your 4 you were up to?
He was my 4 after Peter Woods.
I feel like we're in a lovely world where I'm constantly coming to you because I've mentioned you've mentioned my players already. So my 5 is Keldrick Falk, who we've mentioned. So have you got another new player at 5?
Let's see what we got here at 5. Okay, things are about to get weird again.
Okay.
Weird. At this point, I'm out of guys that I'm comfortable saying, and remember, I'm high floor guy. I'm out of guys that I'm comfortable saying, I can put them into the rotation right away, and they're at least going to give me the run defense and maybe a few other things here and there. And now I'm looking for specific traits. I'm looking more for upside. I'm looking maybe a little bit more for pass rush, and I'm willing to get a little crazy. And from Southeast Louisiana University, not even an FBS player, FCS, Caleb Proctor, another guy I would try out on the edge in a Brandon Graham-style defensive end. He's one of those undersized defensive tackles who tested off the charts, just maybe a shade below Milton Williams, very Milton Williams-esque. I believe he was a visit of some sort with the Eagles. I know they met with him and expressed interest. I can't remember if it was a top 30 visit or not. They also met with Zane Durant, the defensive tackle for Penn State. Now, Howie Roseman has his types, and he has his ways of doing things. He drafted Milton Williams, an undersized guy who was explosively athletic, and he drafted Milton Williams in the 3rd round. Milton Williams showed talent right off the bat, but he was behind some veterans in the rotation. He was lighter and not as good against the run as a result. And year 3, Milton Williams bulked up. He got a little stronger versus the run, and then it took a year before his pass rush to catch up to his new body. And in year 4, Milton Williams was a beast, and he's still a beast today. But let's take a different approach. Let's take a slightly longer-armed version of Milton Williams, which is what Caleb Proctor is. He's got the 33-inch arms, slightly taller as well. And let's put him out to edge instead of bulking him up and taking away from his explosiveness and quickness. Let's take 15 pounds off of him and let's put him out to 5-tech and see how that goes. Now, even at his current roughly 300 pounds, I would see on the Southeast Louisiana tape, and yes, I watched it. I even had to put in a special request. They would do an occasional stunt where he ended up the contained guy out on the edge, almost like he'd be a contained guy, like a wide 9 contained guy in Fangio's system. It wasn't often that they did it, but they did do it on early downs on occasion as a stunt. And the one time he popped out there and the offense wasn't expecting it, and the quarterback wasn't expecting it, he was going to do a QB keeper run. And there was this super quick twitched 300-pound dude tapping his feet, waiting for that quarterback. And he chased him down in the flats for like a 5-7 yard loss. And I'm like, wow. That's some athleticism right there. That's some almost shades of Milton Williams level athleticism. If Milton Williams was just a little bit longer, he could play defensive end, frankly, especially at that lighter weight from a couple years ago. I'm not looking for this guy to be a dominant pass rusher right off the bat, especially with a position switch. But he has high-end traits. He has adequate length. He has good testing. He has good tape. I watched him versus LSU because thank God he at least played one SEC team where I could compare.
He was
right?
good. He was good.
Yes. Yes, he was. Now, I noticed even versus LSU, he had a little bit of problems defending the run at times, but he was even adequate versus the run from the defensive tackle versus those LSU guards. It was almost like I was watching Peter Woods, but even stronger, maybe not quite as nimble, but close to it, a little bit more explosive. He rolled through his hips and delivered a blow and stretched out those arms with a decent arm length and sort of controlled the right guard who was playing for LSU pretty darn well. And he sort of held his own against the left guard in the run. But man, just like I watched Peter Woods and I'm thinking, why isn't Peter Woods a 5-tech versus LSU? I started having the same thoughts with Proctor. And it's not that I don't foresee a future at defensive tackle for Proctor, because I do. For Peter Woods, I did not. Peter Woods, I'm like, you better go to 5-tech, buddy. Lose some weight, go to 5-tech. For Proctor, I could see him excelling in the league in the future at defensive tackle. But in the right now, we need a defensive end who's strong against the run. And I believe he has the adequate length, strength, and athleticism to provide that right off the bat while the rest of his game rounds out. And he has much more upside as a player overall. Should he fail at defensive end a year or two down the line, if one of our expensive defensive tackles walks, we slide him right in.
Interesting. That is really interesting. I was a bit of a coward when it came to Proctor. I struggle with, and this is partly actually as a Brit, I struggle with certain players in college because I don't really understand small school. So I become a coward when I see like Southeastern Louisiana, because I don't really know how to evaluate them. When I see the big colleges, I know what I'm doing because I know who they're playing against, and I really liked him. My issue was interesting, actually. I didn't think he was a very good run defender. But then, as you're saying, if you kick him out to edge, it's funny how he's probably not a great defensive tackle run defender. But if you stick him as a 5 technique, then it's significantly easier because you're often not going up against like giant guards. You might end up with a tight end or a tackle, for example. I wrote he had the best get off of any defensive tackle in the class, which is bizarre because I then ranked him in like rounds 3 to 4. But half of it was literally, and I'm honest, I just wrote, I struggle with his film. I said, I don't really know what to make of a small school interior defensive lineman. I said he was like a developmental upside rotational pass rusher to a defensive tackle. But I did write, I think, where was it? I said, he has arguably the best upfield burst and quickness of any defensive tackle I watched. And I did watch, there was an All-22 account on Twitter that shared his LSU performance. And I watched that, and I watched that after I ranked him. And I didn't want to change my rankings because I was like, no, it's a random video on Twitter. Like, calm down. Then I sort of like, it came up again later on, and I saw I think someone had it in an article, like, did you watch him versus LSU? And I was like, yeah. But I didn't really study it. I just watched it on Twitter, and I should have watched it more. I know some that I've spoke to about the draft that have him as their best defensive tackle in the class. They would take him over any of the top guys, which sounds mental, but the top guys aren't very good either. So I don't think it's the most crazy take in the world. Again, you're going to be out on your own there because I haven't watched him in that position. But I sort of love it. Whether he can do what you're saying is, I have no idea. And I did struggle with his film. But as a player, especially someone as you can get quite late, because I think because of the small school stuff, he will go late. I just think it's interesting. I didn't like him as a run defender. But are you sort of saying that it'll be easier for him because you're kicking him a little bit out wide anyway? So his role as a run defender will become easier than it would be on the
Yes.
interior. Yeah.
Yes, because, defending the run out there versus an offensive tackle or a tight end, as opposed to, a guard and a center or a guard and tackle combination block, it's a lot easier to defend the run out there. And I do think he has some run defense ability. It's just that he lacks the mass to take on multiple blockers.
Yeah. He's also in that size, isn't he? Like, what are you? He's in that little, like, that little kind of weird and wonderful sort of gap where, again, you're that size where could you drop some weight? Which I don't think is the worst idea, because I've just said one of the reasons why I had him so low was because I just didn't see him as defend the run as defensive tackle. And we saw last year what happens if you can't defend the run as a defensive tackle. I sort of don't want you. So as much as I liked him, I was like, I really struggle because he can't defend the run. But if you can tell me you could try him out wide as a 5-tech, he might get better, then I sort of get it. So interesting. Right. This is never a good place to start, but I don't like my next player. I said I'm a coward earlier on. I am a coward. Sometimes I'm a man when I look at rankings and I go, I don't really see it, but I'm also not so in my own bubble, because I think, and part of the way I do this, obviously I'm doing it for Bleeding Green. I sort of report things and I'm like, sometimes I feel like I don't see it, but others do. So I'm going to be more generous. So I had TJ Parker. I liked Zion Young way more than TJ Parker, yet I have TJ Parker at 6 and Zion Young at 7. I'm looking through my notes and I'm like, why? Because everything I write about Zion Young is like high floor. I like him. I mean, I look at what I wrote about TJ Parker and I'm like, I think his upside's limited. I don't think he's a great athlete. There's not a lot of pass rush upside. I didn't see burst. I didn't see twitch. I thought he was too stiff. I didn't particularly like him, but I really liked his motor. I really liked how he sort of played. And then I'm looking at him and I'm looking at the last 3 years and I've got 21 and a half sacks, 41 and a half TFLs. And I'm like, like he had a couple of years ago, he had 6 false fumbles. And I'm like, am I missing something with him? So I ended up saying about him, and I actually would change it now. I would probably change it to putting him I'd probably put Zion Young above him. But I think I was a sucker for production. Like I thought he played hard, and I think the production's there. Whether I think he's got any like pass rush answers in terms of counters and stuff, but he was always there to me. He was very urgent. I think he could play in the run game as well. And I said, I really, really like the motor, the range. And I think I ended up playing him higher because he ticks a lot of boxes, like never misses a game, plays a lot of snaps and produces. So with this edge class, I sort of feel like when I get to this bit, I don't love any of them as much. So it's like a little bit of a drop for me. And I almost went like safety first, where I don't think he's particularly high upside, but I think he can play the run. I think he's a good size and I think he produces well. So I'll put him there even if the film didn't necessarily show me a great player. So I had TJ Parker at 6, but if you were to look at my notes in front of me and you were to say what I said about Zion Young and TJ Parker, you'd go, you like Zion Young more, right? And I'm like, Zion Young didn't have the production that TJ Parker has. So I've sort of bumped him up higher than where I really saw when I watched him. But yeah, did he make your top 10?
He did, actually. He made my number 9 for all the reasons that you said. Yeah, he battles. He's not a softy. Yeah. And he's athletic enough that he can pursue some. He can be useful on stunts and twists as well. So, that's not a very high bar, what we're saying. But this is a functional, rotational defensive end, and he fits the mold of what we kind of need right now.
Yep, 260, big school, productive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's my number 9. I was surprised. I didn't think he was going to be on my list at first, but I appreciate his football effort. I really do, and he is useful on early downs. If he never becomes that pass rush guy that he flashed in the past, he will help your football team win games.
Right. The good thing is we can tick off a few because you end up repeating him as well then, because this is a long one. But I think the people will like this. So sometimes you need a proper in-depth one. Who have you got then? Who's your 6?
My 6 was Malachi Lawrence.
Perfect. So I can also skip my 7 because my 7's Zion Young, who we discussed as well. So we can jump to your 7.
All right. My 7 is Crazy Train. Jayshawn Barham from Michigan.
Not as crazy because I have him as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
How about that?
I have him as my 10. And you go first because you picked him, and I'll tell you what I've written.
Sure. Violence, physicality, good explosiveness, decent pursuit as well. Has experience dropping in coverage. I saw somebody mention him as a defensive end. One of my good buddies, Greg Hart, even mentioned him to me months ago because Greg's been studying draft prospects all year and last year as well. So he was a little more prepared than I was. Finally got to the tape, and I'm like, he's not even playing defensive end. He's playing like this weird off-ball hybrid linebacker position. Yeah. He's not a true linebacker, but he's off-ball, and they're just using him like a human battering ram, flying downhill, plugging gaps. Sometimes he played in pursuit as well, but I really did like his violence when he came downhill. Against the run, even though it was more as a gap shooter, as a plugger from the second level, like a quasi linebacker. I kept thinking, man, I need to see some snaps of him playing the edge if I'm going to put him on my edge list. I watched like bits and pieces of 10 games, and I finally got to late season Michigan just from this past year, where they finally started putting him on the edge. And even though they were putting him on the edge, they barely let the poor guy pass rush. They were constantly having him collide with the tight end. He would line up on the side of the tight end most of the time, and he'd whack the tight end before the tight end went out on a route. And it's like, well, you can't pass rush that way. So I didn't get to see a ton of him pass rushing, just a little bits and pieces here and there. But I saw enough explosiveness, and he does have that 6'1", 10-yard split. I saw enough violence, and I saw enough tape of him on the edge, heading the edge versus the run, way more violently than you expect for somebody on 240 pounds, similar to Nolan Smith. I remember when Nolan Smith was drafted, people were like, oh, we need someone to set the edge. I'm like, oh, apparently you haven't watched his college tape.
So he does.
Because let me tell you, he'll set the edge versus the run, and I don't think Barham is Nolan Smith pre-triceps injury level as a run defender or as a pursuit guy, but he's on that spectrum. And I could see him as a poor man's Nolan Smith, who, even though he's light, comes in and is in the edge rotation and helps us versus the run. I could absolutely see it. I could even, if Vic Fangio wants to get funky with some of that min front that I was talking about, you could even use him some at off-ball linebacker, just blitzing up the middle, destroying the running back the way our linebacker did the last couple of years, Kobe Dean. So he could have multiple usages if you want to get funky. And if you don't want to get funky, just put him out there as an edge, as a rotational guy. He might have some untapped pass rush on the edge and flashes. He showed it. I mean, he certainly can blitz up the middle, that's for sure. And I say, why not at this point? Because I'm at number 7 on my list. And frankly, everybody's got warts. So I like his violence. I like his play demeanor. On the goal line, they would put him right off the nose tackle. And he would be the first guy plugging violently downhill versus the run, even in goal line and short yardage situations. And he was very effective at it. So that kind of violence, that burst, I think there's something there that can be utilized, even if it's just a rotational role.
Yeah, there you go. I thought this was going to be my crazy one, and I had him at 10th. People are going to be surprised, I think, that both of us have him above guys that maybe they've heard of more, like Gabe Jackas or Danny Dennis Sutton. They're not, for me, close to this guy. I had him 10. I actually had the bottom of the second round, which might surprise people again. So I was pretty high on him. This is more of, like you said, this is more of me putting myself in what I think the Eagles will want. So I looked this up, and he only rushed the quarterback 162 times last year on the edge. So he is very much learning the position. This is a edge hybrid off-ball backer. And I think I basically agree with everything you said. In my exact thing I wrote, I said he needs a lot of work as an edge, but he has the traits and talent to be a fascinating fit in this defense. He's got that edge off-ball hybrid movement skills. I said, I have no idea where he will go, but I think the Eagles will look at him in the second, even if that's significantly earlier than the consensus board. I just liked him. Yeah, to me, he just looked like he needs a lot of work. But again, we go back to this draft class not being the strongest. And I'm like, when you get into that round, there was a play I saw where he was like lined up over the center and he dropped easily. And I don't want to say the words like movable chess piece that everyone says, but it was a little bit like that. I was like, I think you can put him anywhere. I go back to stunts, twists, as you said, stick him on the edge, stick him at off ball. Just gives you a lot of versatility. And I like the way he played. Is he an edge pass rusher at this point? No. But people probably know I've got a type by this point. I want you to be able to drop into coverage. I want you to be able to stunt. I want you to be able to twist. And I do think he can set the edge. When he did play there, I thought he was good enough. So I guess you're higher on him in terms of still a little bit crazier because you had him at 7? Yes. But I did have him in my top 10. And honestly, I think I moved him around because, again, cowards, I think he's way lower in the consensus. Like, I think in most people's consensus, he's below, like, LT Overton. He's below Hyatt Moore, definitely below Danny Dennis Sutton and that. And I didn't want to bump him up too high, but But if I was doing this purely off Fangio, I could totally see them taking him higher. So yeah, I think we're on the same page on him. So good name for Eagles fans to look out for, because he could be a really, really good schematic fit. I'm going to seamlessly transition into my 8, because I'm a little surprised you haven't had this guy yet, because I also think he's a really good Fangio fit. Had Joshua Josephs out of Tennessee. Again, for similar reasons that I mentioned before, he's not the greatest pass rusher. And at this stage in my draft, you're not going to get like natural, because they go first round. But he's explosive and he can drop into coverage. So I think scheme pressures, stunts and twists. I didn't love all of the film, which is why I have him down here a little bit. But I thought he was like really, really good with first step. Like shot out of a cannon first step. If you're running stunts, if you're running twists, again, I wrote, if you give him a free path at the quarterback, he gets there fast. He's got a little bit of speed to power. He can ball rush reasonably well. He is one of those fast guys that sometimes just runs straight past the quarterback. He will overrun the play a lot. And the run defense is a problem. There's like times when he looks a bit confused pre-snap, and he's slow against the run as well. And he's just a little bit out of play too often. Like he's undisciplined. Gap integrity is going to be a problem at 240 pounds. So I think with the current room they've got, I can see why you don't like him in terms of the size and the run defense. But I also think in terms of like the coverage, schematic stuff you can do with him, scheme pressure, I think he fits really well. I think going back to our earlier chat, they would like him more if their edge room looked a little bit different this year. They might decide it's one too many light guys. But the more I watched him, the more I thought I could see the Eagles liking the way he plays. So I had Joshua Josephs at 8.
Totally reasonable take. I could see him eventually becoming a scheme fit for sure. If you took Alex Hunt and Josh Sweat and they got married and had a baby, their baby would probably be Joshua Josephs.
Yep, he looks like a Fangio guy. To me, he looked like a player that I've seen multiple times play for the Eagles.
Yes. So this is where I'm going to veer off from you probably the most. And it was visceral. So I'm not even sure if I'm thinking clearly. When you say he has to develop, I think you touched on that a little bit. I started to hate the tape. He needs so much development as a football player.
Yeah.
He's all mold of clay right now to me.
He's a fast guy.
Yeah, he's fast, he's long, and he looks like he could do things on the football field. This one play jumped out to me where I'm like, I just need to see this guy set the edge once versus the run, for the love of God.
No, he won't.
and finally, he started to set the edge, but he was the unblocked defender. So instead of looking across the line of scrimmage for the puller, he looks at the offensive tackle to his left, who's blocking a different human, and he leans on the offensive tackle to be like, look, Dad, I'm setting the edge. And that was the last straw. I had to turn the tape off.
He's a guy that I'm higher on than way above consensus, like way. Not because I liked him that much, just because for me, he looked like a fit. I didn't love him like personally, but he fit what I think they want to do in terms of the coverage and like the stunts and the twists. But don't get me wrong, the exact thing I put was literally, he occasionally backs up from the point of attack, is completely taken out of play, and fails to maintain basic gap integrity. Like, it's a problem. But again, in this draft, that sort of mid-round, day 2 for me, if you can take a player you think you can use. But I think consensus-wise, he's like round 4, round 5. Like, he's more of a fit to me rather than the player's really good.
Yeah, I could see it. I could definitely see him fitting. There are some raw ingredients there. It's just emphasis on the raw.
Yeah, got a lot to do.
Might take a year or two. I don't know if he's going to be able to get in the field on year 1, but maybe. It's certainly possible. It's happened before. Alex Hunt, Alex Hunt was a better...
Talk about raw.
Yeah, he was raw as a defensive end for sure. Playing at that small school he did, and then the role that he played at that in college. And I was a bit shocked at how high the Eagles took him. I only had one game tape of his all 22. But to me, the difference between Joshua Josephs and Alex Hunt was, even though Alex Hunt at the time did not look at all like a defensive end to me, for the most part, I shouldn't say it all, and looked like he needed to get stronger, looked like he needed to develop, he did look like a good football player. Like, you could tell he had football in his blood and in his brain. He was a former safety. And it showed, because they had him constantly dropping in coverage, and he was making smart decisions in conflict. He was a football player who just had to be physically developed at a more advanced program than whatever his school was offering as a defensive end. I suspect he even developed some during the pre-draft process, because when he showed up at the Senior Bowl, he was playing more like a defensive end than he did in college just 1 or 2 months prior. I'm sure the Eagles saw him at the Senior Bowl, and that was a big reason why they took the plunge. That, and also he's obviously a Fangio edge.
Yeah, that's probably why I mentioned like the Jadix Hunt, because to me, like you said, he was never going that high ever. That was an upside shot scheme fit wise. Right, who have you got then? Have you got anyone that we haven't discussed yet? I'm guessing you do.
Yes, I do. My number 8, I had him off my list. I had him on, I had him off, I had him on. And then I saw some sort of PFF stat where he had some sort of pass rush win rate in true pass sets that was top 3 in the entire class. And I said, okay, maybe this guy will get better where I currently feel that he is weak, because I do like him as an edge rusher. I do like his upside. I just don't like, at times, the lack of physicality and the lack of fight. And that is Derek Moore from Michigan.
Yeah, I had him just outside. If we went down 1, he's my 11. So yeah.
So it's weird. Somebody told me that he's actually a good run defender. I'm sure there's some sort of stats out there supporting that. But when I watched the tape, setting the edge as a 1.5 gapper, extending, using his length.
He doesn't use his length. I wrote doesn't use his length.
And he has length. Use the length.
Yeah.
Oh, it was so hard to watch, because I felt this whole draft season that he has more potential as a pass rusher than all these guys ranked ahead of him. Not all, but the vast majority of the guys ranked ahead of him. It looks like a pass rusher to me. He's smooth. He's explosive. He's nasty in that B gap, whether it's a stunt or whether he just wants to, threaten the upfield shoulder a little bit on the offensive tackle and then explode into the B gap to sack the quarterback. He's got some speed to power. He's not somebody that's necessarily always going to be bending around the edge or always running around the upfield edge of the offensive tackle. But I feel like he's explosive enough to threaten that upfield shoulder of the offensive tackle, just enough to use his explosiveness and power to bull rush or jump into that B gap and get the quarterback. So, kind of like almost like a Brandon Graham style pass rusher, young Brandon Graham. However, unlike young Brandon Graham, he does not mix it up in the run game the way I want to see it. Physically, like you said, it looks like the ingredients are there for him to be a better run defender than he currently is. And if anybody can get that out of him, I think Vic Fangio will. So he makes my top 10 because from a pass rush standpoint, he's too talented not to. And from a run defense standpoint, even though I don't like what I see enough talent as a run defender, if he chooses to use it, to at least become adequate as a rotational early down run defender. So Derek Moore squeezed into my list. He's number 8.
Yeah, this is where I'll be honest. I mentioned about the tiers. There's like a big break for me here. So like I could have like more, the guy you mentioned, Barham, like Crawford, Jackus. They're all like together for me. So although we're doing top 10, we won't discuss all of these players, but they're all very similar. I quite liked him. I had him as I mentioned. I was annoyed like you. It's funny that I wrote down literally. I think this guy doesn't use his length. I said he was in my very simple summary because we are going very long now. But I just said high effort, edge, physicality, motor, reliable. He's a rotational piece with some upside as a pass rusher. But I wish he used his length more, like you said. We've got through a long podcast, and the good news is I think I've managed to not piss you off. So what I thought I'd do was I thought I'd throw in someone just to really annoy you and all the listeners. And sometimes you have to play to your type. I don't think this guy is going to be in the Eagles top 10, but I've thrown him in there anyway, because sometimes you play to type. And you mentioned I like a speedy, you know where I'm going, a very speedy, a very light, a very productive. If you want the most, I quite like this quote. I should have put this in my actual Bleeding Green article. I put he's like a social media TikTok pass rusher, because he's just like, he's all highlights. He's all highlights. He is utterly all over the place. There is like zero technique. You are never going to use him in the run game. There's like no power. He's less than 240 pounds. He's not doing it. But he is fast, and he is very, very, very chaotic as a pass rusher, incredibly explosive. So I threw in Romello Height, and I wrote, if the Eagles want to add solely a third down only pass rush specialist with some juice, I love myself a pass rush chaos merchant. If you want pure chaos and you want an overall compact speed rusher with long arms who can create something on third down, this is your guy. And at this point in the draft, I'm okay with specialist roles, and I'm okay accepting that at this stage, he's never going to play on early downs. Last year, 9.5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles. Like, he has a type. He plays how he plays. There were times that I was not watching him, but I was watching someone else playing against him at Texas Tech. And he's watching the left tackle, and I'm watching Romello Height because he's just running around like a nutcase. And sometimes the offensive tackle just like would just beat him. And then Height would just burst by him. And it was almost like, I think even Height surprised himself. I don't know if he had a plan what he was going to do. He's just got long arms, nearly 33-inch arms, and he runs incredibly fast. And I was like, do you know what? At this stage in the draft, there's not many players like him that have a lot of success. He's been injured. He's older. There are so many reasons to have him off your board, but I'd accept it. I'd accept it. Could you do a little bit of off-ball stuff there at times just to mix things up? Could you drop him into coverage? Absolutely. Like, he's so rangy because he's so quick. So I was like, let's put the most anti-run defense guy in my board somewhere. So I know he's not going to be in yours because he's not playing anywhere near early downs, but I couldn't not throw him in.
I don't hate it at all. Watching all these different prospects for the offensive line, since everybody's offensive line crazy and offensive tackle crazy for the Eagles, with Lane Johnson possibly only here one more year, watched a lot of these offensive tackles. And what happened was Romello Height became my litmus test.
Yeah. Can you deal with him?
Yeah. If you can handle Romello Height, there might be a potential future for you as a starting offensive tackle. If you couldn't, probably not. He was going to find the weakness, and he was going to get to that half-man relationship and break through that one arm, and he was going to get that quarterback, man. And he was fun to watch. He was fun to watch.
PFF had him as a 21 point, and I go, no, pass rush numbers are very, let's say, depends how you judge it, but they had him as a pass rush win rate of 21%, exactly the same as his teammate David Bailey. I think Romello Height was at 21.8%, and Bailey was at 21.6%. Like, they were, in terms of just straight up rushing the quarterback, his numbers are as good as anyone's in the class in terms of sacks and pressures. So at that point, I was like, screw it. If I'm going to have a list in the top 10 and he's not in it, I'm almost like, for what? So I can have like a higher upside player in like I don't know, people really like Gabe Jackas. I didn't see it as much, but I was just like, no, let's put this guy in here. If you want what I want, which is chaos on third down, do it. If you want to play him on first and second down, don't bother, because he's not playing. So that's where I had him. Well, I'm glad you didn't completely hate him. It's hard to hate him, to be fair, because like you said, when you're watching the tackles, and Texas Tech are just so good that it's a good team to watch offensive linemen from, because Texas Tech caused so many people problems. I just couldn't not watch him. I was like, oh, yeah, there he is again. Oh, there's another Romello Height play. I'm like, I'm not even watching the same side, and he's on the other side of the field, and I'm like, look at the burst. He's just a weird guy. So incredibly boom bust potential. But the kind of guy that, you know what, if it's a playoff game and the Eagles are playing someone that's got Romello Height on their team, you never feel that comfortable when you're in 3rd and 8, because you know he could do something weird. And I think there is value in someone making splash plays, even if they're not consistently good. So that's the last one I'll talk about, because I'd bar at my temp. So that's the last bit of analysis that I will give.
No worries. I do think, like you mentioned, he's good at dropping in pass coverage. He's solid in pursuit. So, yeah, taking on offensive tackles in the run game on early downs is an issue. But you know what? If you want a designated pass rusher type, and if you have a plan for how to help him on rundowns, I could see him being a good football player. I'll tell you what, Caleb Lomu, who a lot of people consider a first-round offensive tackle, who the Eagles did have in for a top 30 visit, Lomu faced off against Romello Height this past season and Bailey on the other side. And Bailey, as you know, is going to be a very high draft pick in this class, possibly edge 1, according to some people.
Yep.
Guess who gave Lomu more problem? It wasn't Bailey. It was Romello Height. So you don't have to apologize for anyone for putting this old guy on your list. Nah. Good football player.
Go then, finish us off. Give us your 9 and 10.
So a few honorable mentions. Gabe Jackas. I can't pronounce his name. Gabe Jackas. I did not see the run defense I was expecting. I almost thought at times he was a mediocre run defender, despite being a rather powerful dude, and I couldn't totally understand it. I don't know if lack of functional length was an issue. I don't know if it's more coaching he needs. He does have some pass rush ability. Everybody talks about how they like him as a 4-eye. I don't. I don't think you could put him at 4-eye just inside the offensive tackle's shoulder on an odd front too often on early downs at the NFL level. I think you'd be able to move him a little bit too easily, and maybe he'd still make the tackle, but it would be 5 yards downfield. Romello Height was an honorable mention, who you already went into. Kieran Crawford, not particularly interesting in any singular aspect, just a good athlete.
I had him at 12, and that's why I had Height over him, because I'm just like, shoot for the moon. Give me someone else.
Absolutely. He has good physicality, Crawford. He can set the edge versus the run. He was athletic enough for pursuit. Not much pass rush. Maybe he might get some one day, but he could play for Fangio on early downs in the 4-2-5 on the wide nines. Mobile enough and strong enough. And another honorable mention was R. Mason Thomas, who just didn't make my list because I'm more focused on run defense because of our current room, similar to Romello Height, not making my list for the same reason. So they're good football players, and I don't blame you for bringing them up at all. My number 10 is I decided to give him a little bit of love because he's the most boring edge prospect ever. LT Overton from Alabama.
Yep. I had a feeling I was going to shout it out before. I literally put, if you want a bigger guy to play the run, Overton is your man. I don't see a lot else, but a physically imposing run defender whose edge setting ability makes him very valuable against the run.
Yeah, they played him inside. They do this all the time at Alabama. They have these tweener guys, and it's like, are they a defensive tackle? Are they a 3-4 defensive end? Are they an edge? And invariably, they play them inside a lot as, 3-4 defensive ends / defensive tackles. And I felt like that wasn't good for him. Maybe going to Alabama was a bad choice for him. I don't know. I don't know all the details. Maybe he thought he could be viewed as a pass rushing defensive tackle potentially, and it might help his draft stock because obviously he's not running by people on the edge. He's not all that swift out in space. But I actually liked him on the edge more than I liked him slid inside. And I felt like Alabama should have played him out on the edge more often. Similar to how I said Peter Woods should be like a 5-tech. Well, LT Overton should be a 5-tech. I don't like his range a lot in pursuit, but I do think he's flexible. I do think he's got good length, strong at the point of attack. So he can jump into other gaps and affect gaps other than his own, especially if he's defending the run out on the edge instead of the interior, where he'd have to take on double teams. And as a pass rusher, he's not going to win clean. He's not going to win fast. He's not Malachi Lawrence, who might, explode by somebody and get to the quarterback in under 2.5 seconds. But he does slowly but surely, methodically not give up and slowly collapse that pocket. So I could see maybe a world where there's some edge rush value. I just wouldn't want him to be my number one edge rusher on my roster for sure. Big guy, early downs, flexible enough that, maybe he can help with contain a little bit on the outside. So that's LT Overton.
I like it. That might be the longest show I've done. And I've podcasted for a while. That was a monster, but I still like that. That's some good stuff. And I would say as well, because we've covered more than 10 players, I feel that there's a good chance Eagles will draft one of the players we spoke about today, which is always nice.
I'd say that's a good possibility.
Should we have a little quick recap then for anyone who is, if you're still here, impressive. Well done in one go. So let's recap very quickly of our 10 because I hate it on a podcast when they never recap it because I'm always like, I can't remember. So I had Malachi Lawrence 1, Akeem Mesidor 2, Cassius Howell 3, R. Mason Thomas 4, and that's like a little tier break for me. Then I had like Keldrick Falk, TJ Parker, Zion Young, another little tier break, and then Joshua Josephs, Romello Height, and Jayshon Barham. Then there would be a little gap for me to some of the guys you mentioned. I then had Moore, Crawford, and Yakas in a group sort of below them. Overton was like one down. And yeah, what about yourself?
Ironically, I need a recap too because I scratched all over my notes and I could barely read it. Well, it looks like I have Cassius Howell as my number 1. Depending on the scheme discussion with Vic Fangio. As my number 2, I have Falk, big, long defensive end against the run. As my number 3, it looks like I have Peter Woods, who could be moved out to 5-tech and has to lose some weight. Number 4, Zion Young. Number 5, Caleb Proctor, moving him out to 5-tech from defensive tackle. And if it fails, you could just slide him inside in the future. Number 6, I have Malachi Lawrence. 7, Jayshon Barham from Michigan. 8, Derek Moore from Michigan. 9 from Clemson, TJ Parker. Number 10, LT Overton from Alabama, the tweener.
There you go. Yeah, the big guy at the end.
I should have warned you in advance. I always do one thing the first time I have a guest on the show. I ask them what draft saying would apply to you. Quick but not fast, quick in a phone booth, big-legged, heady player, violent.
That's a See, that's a draftism question, isn't it? That's a draftism question.
I surprised you with it, so we could do that maybe another time in the future if you can't think of one off the cuff.
I can't say. I was going to say the one that came to my head was the because of how long I've been doing this in the media was the Ramela Height one, the social media pass rusher, because I'm all about the traits and the pass rush. So I might go with that one because I'm a sucker for the social media pass rusher. That was the other one that came to mind was R. Mason Thomas. I think I said something like just like pure fire off the edge. Let's go for the social media pass rusher, seeing as I've been doing this online for too long.
I think that's quite appropriate because I can tell you you're on many a person's top 10 lists as social media pass rushers go. So thank you for coming on, and I look forward to working with you more at the Eagles Film Room at Patreon. Everybody, please check that out. And go Birds.